I knew something was off the moment I stepped into the house. The air smelled different, like cologne that didn't belong to me. It was subtle, but unmistakable, clinging to the walls of the home I'd built with Samantha. My gut twisted as I set down my bag. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made your skin crawl. I wasn't even supposed to be here. My work trip had finished a day early, and I'd thought surprising Samantha might be a good way to shake off the distance growing between us. But now I stood frozen in the entryway, my chest tightening with each step I took toward the staircase. Halfway up, I heard it. Laughter. A man's voice. Low and casual. Hers followed. Light and familiar, like nothing was wrong in the world. It took everything in me to keep moving. Step by step, I climbed, the weight in my chest growing heavier with every sound. The bedroom door was ajar, the voices louder now. And then I saw them. Samantha lying back on our bed, tangled in the sheets. And on top of her was a man I recognized immediately. David Reynolds, her boss. He was grinning like he didn't have a care in the world, his shirt tossed on the floor, his tie dangling over the nightstand. What the hell is going on? My voice boomed louder than I intended, startling them both. David turned his head slowly, that smug grin never leaving his face. Well, this is awkward. Samantha sat up, pulling the sheet over herself. Ethan, what are you doing home? She asked, like I was the one who needed to explain myself. What am I doing here? I barked. This is my house, Samantha. What the hell are you doing? David stood, moving at a leisurely pace that made my fists clench. Relax, man. No need to get worked up. Get dressed. I snapped, taking a step toward him. And get the hell out of my house. He smirked, reaching for his pants. Sure, I was just leaving anyway. But let's be clear, I'll be back. Try me, I said through gritted teeth. See how that works out for you. He chuckled like I was some kind of joke, buttoning his shirt as he strolled past me. He paused at the door, glancing back with that same infuriating smirk. She deserves better, you know. Someone who knows how to make her happy. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed him by the shoulder and shoved him into the wall. Say one more word, I growled, my face inches from his. I dare you. David raised his hands in mock surrender, still grinning like he was untouchable. You've got spirit, I'll give you that, he said before walking out. The sound of the front door closing was like a gunshot in the silence that followed. I turned to Samantha, my blood still boiling. She sat on the edge of the bed, arms crossed, glaring at me like I was the one who'd ruined her evening. Care to explain? I said, my voice low and sharp. Samantha sighed, rolling her eyes. You're overreacting, Ethan. Overreacting? I barked, stepping closer. I just walked in on my wife screwing her boss in our bed. How should I react, Samantha? She shrugged, her tone turning cold. It's not like this was some big secret. What the hell does that mean? It means this isn't about you, she snapped. David gives me what I need, and if you're not happy about it, that's your problem. I stared at her, disbelief and rage swirling together in my chest. Are you even hearing yourself? You think I'm just going to stand here and let you parade him through my house like this? She stood, squaring her shoulders as she met my glare. This is our house, Ethan, and David isn't going anywhere. You can either deal with it or leave. Your choice. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I couldn't even think. The sheer audacity of her words left me stunned. Then, without a word, I stepped forward and grabbed her left hand. What are you doing? She demanded, pulling back. I yanked off the engagement ring and held it up between us. You don't deserve this anymore, I said, my voice steady. This belonged to someone who respected what it stood for. And that's not you. Her face twisted in anger, but I didn't care. I turned and walked out of the room, ignoring her calls after me. That night, as I sat in the living room with the engagement ring in my hand, one thought burned brighter than the rest. Samantha thought she had the upper hand. She was wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the next day piecing together every clue I could find. Samantha wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. She thought she could humiliate me and turn my life into a circus. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I started by checking our shared computer. Samantha wasn't particularly tech-savvy, and while she locked her phone obsessively, She often used the desktop to browse the internet. Sure enough, I found a treasure trove of information. First, there were email exchanges between her and David. Reading through them was like stepping into a parallel universe. Samantha was sweet, flirty, even vulnerable in her messages to him. The exact opposite of the cold, dismissive woman she'd become with me. But what really set my blood boiling were the details. She didn't just meet David for late-night rendezvous. She'd brought him into my life, our life, in ways I hadn't even realized. Dinner parties where I'd shaken his hand, backyard barbecues where he'd sipped my beer, and company events where he'd slapped me on the back like we were old friends. All the while, he was screwing my wife behind my back. Then came the receipts. Hotel stays, fancy dinners, and even a charge for lingerie that I knew damn well wasn't for me. I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen, my hands clenched into fists. Every detail felt like another knife twisting in my gut. This wasn't an affair. It was a full-blown campaign to erase me from my own life. When Samantha came home that evening, I was waiting for her. I hadn't said a word all day, and she'd acted like nothing was wrong, texting me a quick "be home late," as if I wasn't already well aware of why. She walked through the door carrying a takeout bag, humming softly to herself. When she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, her humming stopped. "You're still up," she said, her tone neutral. "Sit down," I said. She hesitated, clearly sizing up the situation. "Why? It's late. I'm tired." "Sit down, Samantha," I repeated, my voice firm. She rolled her eyes but pulled out a chair, setting the takeout bag on the table. "What's this about?" I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I turned my laptop toward her, the emails open on the screen. Her face didn't change much, but I caught the slight twitch in her jaw. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice sharpening. "You really think I wouldn't find out?" I said, leaning forward. "You didn't even try to cover your tracks, Samantha. You thought I was too stupid to notice, didn't you?" She scoffed, leaning back in her chair. "Oh, grow up, Ethan. It's not like this is some big scandal. You already knew." "I didn't know the half of it," I said, my voice low but icy. "Like how you've been using my money to fund your little escapades. Or how you've been parading David around right under my nose." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "And what are you going to do about it? Call a lawyer? Go ahead. See how far that gets you. You know the laws, Ethan. I'll take half of everything, and you'll be left with nothing." Her arrogance was staggering. "You think this is about the money?" I said, standing up and leaning over the table. "This is about respect, Samantha, and you've lost every ounce of it." "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes again. "You're just mad because someone else is better at making me happy. Face it, Ethan, you've been a placeholder from the beginning." I could feel the rage simmering beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. She wanted me to lose it. She wanted to push me into saying or doing something stupid. Instead, I walked over to the counter, grabbed the takeout bag she brought home, and tossed it in the trash. "What the hell are you doing?" she snapped, standing up. "You don't get to act like this is your house anymore," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You gave that up the moment you decided to invite David into our bed." She stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you're the perfect husband." "I never claimed to be perfect," I said. "But at least I kept my vows. Can you say the same?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. If Samantha thought she could keep playing this game, she was wrong. I called in a favor from a friend who worked in cybersecurity. Within hours, I had access to even more of Samantha's digital footprint. Her text messages painted an even uglier picture. Not only was she bragging to David about how easy it was to manipulate me, but there were messages to other men, flirtatious, suggestive, and outright explicit. David wasn't the only one. Samantha had been playing me for years. And then there was the kicker, a message from David to Samantha discussing how they could push me out entirely. The plan was simple: humiliate me, drain my finances, and force me to leave the house. They were even joking about who would get to use the master bedroom first. By the time I finished reading, I was seething. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a calculated attempt to destroy me. I called my lawyer that afternoon. He'd been handling divorces for over 2 decades. And after I explained the situation, he didn't mince words. "She's trying to ruin you," he said. "But if you play this right, we can turn the tables. I took his advice. Over the next week, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Emails, text messages, receipts, photos, and financial records. I wasn't just going to divorce Samantha. I was going to expose her for the manipulative, selfish person she truly was. By the time Samantha confronted me about my sudden coldness, it was too late. "You've been acting strange," she said one evening as I sat in the living room, sorting through paperwork. "Strange?" I said, barely glancing up. "You mean not letting you walk all over me anymore?" She frowned, clearly caught off guard by my tone. "What's your problem, Ethan?" "My problem," I said, standing up, "is that I've spent years giving everything to someone who doesn't deserve it. But don't worry, Samantha. That's about to change." Her expression shifted, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" "You'll find out soon enough," I said, walking past her. I could feel her eyes on me as I headed upstairs. For the first time in years, I felt in control. Samantha thought she held all the cards, but she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Over the next few days, Samantha must have sensed that the balance of power was shifting. Gone were her smug remarks and careless attitude, replaced by a cautious politeness that I hadn't seen in years. She didn't outright apologize or acknowledge her behavior, but there were cracks in her confident facade. Good. While she tiptoed around the house, I was quietly preparing my next move. My lawyer's advice had been clear: gather everything and make it airtight. Samantha wasn't just going to lose me. She was going to lose everything she valued. The first step was leveraging the evidence I'd gathered. The emails, text messages, and financial records were already a damning case against her, but I wanted more. I needed undeniable proof that even Samantha couldn't spin or dismiss. So, I called a private investigator. When I met with Jack Turner, he didn't seem surprised by my story. A former cop turned PI, he'd heard it all before. Cheating spouses, shady deals, and double lives. "You'd be amazed how many people think they can get away with this kind of thing," Jack said, his voice gruff but calm. "But they always leave a trail." He took the file I compiled and leafed through it, nodding occasionally. "This is good stuff," he said. "But if you want to nail her, we'll need some photos. Something that'll hold up in court." "I don't just want photos," I said, leaning forward. "I want the whole damn circus. I want to know where they go, what they do, and who else is involved." Jack smirked. "You got it. Give me a couple of weeks." Meanwhile, Samantha's behavior grew stranger. She spent more time away from home, claiming work obligations or girls' nights that I knew didn't exist. When she was home, she was either glued to her phone or oddly attentive, asking if I needed anything or suggesting we spend time together. It would have been laughable if it weren't so transparent. One night, as we sat in the living room, she tried to make small talk, her voice almost cheerful. "So, how's work?" she asked, glancing at me over the rim of her wine glass. "Fine," I said, barely looking up from my laptop. She hesitated, then pushed forward. "I was thinking maybe we could take a trip soon. Just the two of us. Somewhere nice." I couldn't help but laugh. The audacity of it was almost impressive. "A trip?" I said, closing the laptop and meeting her gaze. "Why, Samantha? So you can invite David along as your plus one?" Her face froze, the fake smile slipping for just a moment before she recovered. "Ethan, that's not fair," she said, her tone defensive. "Fair?" I said, leaning back in my chair. "You want to talk about fair? Let's start with you bringing another man into my house. Into my bed." She set the glass down with a clink, her expression hardening. "We've already talked about this. I thought we were moving on." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You really think it's that simple, don't you? That you can walk all over me, and I'll just roll over and take it?" "Not anymore, Samantha." "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You'll find out," I said, standing up and heading upstairs. Jack's call came a week later. "I've got what you need," he said. "Photos, videos, timestamps, the works. And you're not going to like it." "I didn't hire you to sugarcoat it," I replied. When I met him at his office, he laid everything out on the table. The photos showed Samantha and David at a hotel, their faces unmistakable. But it didn't stop there. There were other men, faces I didn't recognize, meeting her in other places. restaurants, parking lots, and once even in the alley behind a downtown bar. This isn't just an affair, Jack said, tapping the stack of photos. She's running wild. I stared at the evidence, the weight of it sinking in. This wasn't just about me anymore. Samantha had made a mockery of our marriage, our home, and everything we'd built. Jack handed me a USB drive. Everything's on here. You've got more than enough to bury her. Good, I said, my voice steady. Because that's exactly what I plan to do. The next phase of my plan required precision. I reached out to Samantha's parents, who had always been supportive of our marriage. They deserved to know the truth, and I wanted them on my side when everything came crashing down. When I met them at a coffee shop, I kept my tone calm but firm, presenting the evidence without embellishment. At first, they were skeptical, but as I showed them the photos and messages, their disbelief turned to shock. I don't know what to say, her mother whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't want it to come to this. But you deserve to know. Her father, a stoic man who rarely showed emotion, clenched his jaw and nodded. Thank you for telling us, he said. We'll talk to her. Samantha came home later than usual that night, her expression guarded. We need to talk, she said, setting her purse down. Funny, I said, standing up. I was about to say the same thing. She froze, her eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. Open it. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the contents. The photos, the messages, the receipts, it was all there. Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Ethan, I can explain. Don't, I said, cutting her off. Don't insult me with your lies. This is who you are, Samantha, and everyone's going to know it. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You can pack your things, I continued, my tone cold. You're done here, and if you try to fight me on this, I'll make sure every single one of these ends up in the hands of your family, your friends, and David's wife. Her composure shattered. You wouldn't, she whispered. Try me, I said, my gaze never wavering. Samantha stood there, shaking, as the weight of her choices finally began to sink in. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't in control anymore. Samantha sat in the living room, silent, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her defiance had slipped over the past few days, replaced by a brittle, defensive energy. I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out her next move. I wasn't about to let her make one. You've been unusually quiet, I said, my tone calm but laced with steel. No excuses? No clever little deflections this time? She glared at me, but there was no heat behind it. What do you want me to say, Ethan? That I'm sorry? That I regret it? Would that make you happy? I smirked, leaning back in my chair. No, Samantha. You're way past the point of apologies. This isn't about making me happy. It's about making things right. Or at least as close to right as they can be after what you've done. She looked away, her jaw tightening. So, what now? You've already humiliated me with that little stunt at my parents' house. What more do you want? Her attempt to turn the blame on me was almost laughable. Humiliated you? I said, sitting forward. Samantha, you did that all by yourself. I just showed them the truth. You're mad because the mask came off, and now everyone knows who you really are. That's not fair, she snapped, her voice rising. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I cut in. You're selfish, manipulative, and you're pissed because I'm not rolling over like you expected me to. She stood up, pacing the room, her hands moving in sharp, frustrated gestures. You're blowing this out of proportion, Ethan. People cheat all the time. It doesn't mean I don't care about you. I barked out a laugh, the sound bitter and sharp. You don't care about me, Samantha. You care about yourself. This whole thing, David, the other men, the lies, it was never about us. It was always about you. She stopped pacing, her face twisting into a sneer. Fine. You want the truth? I was bored. You're boring, Ethan. You work, you come home, you sit on the couch, and you expect me to be satisfied with that. Well, I wasn't. So, I found excitement somewhere else. Happy now? I stood, crossing the room until I was inches from her. You think that's an excuse? That your boredom gives you a free pass to destroy everything we built together. We built, she repeated mockingly. Don't act like you're some perfect husband, Ethan. You were so wrapped up in your job, you barely noticed me. I didn't feel like your wife. I felt like a damn roommate. Bull, I said, my voice sharp. I noticed you, Samantha. I took care of you. I trusted you. And you threw it all away for a cheap thrill. For a moment, the anger drained from her face, replaced by something that almost looked like regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. So, what now? She asked, crossing her arms again. You've got your evidence. You've made your threats. What's your grand plan, Ethan? Are you going to drag me through the mud, ruin my reputation, take me to court? Or are you just going to keep lording this over me until you feel better about yourself? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Oh, I'm way past the threatening phase, Samantha. I don't need to lord anything over you. I've already set the wheels in motion. Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? I've been busy, I said, stepping back and gesturing toward the table, where the stack of evidence sat neatly organized. You see, I didn't just collect this for fun. I've sent copies to David's wife, to your firm's HR department, to our financial advisor, and to a few other people who might find it relevant. Her face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? I said, tilting my head. You can check if you'd like, but I wouldn't waste time. The email should have hit their inboxes by now. You vindictive bastard, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed my career, my reputation. No, Samantha, I interrupted. You destroyed them. I just made sure everyone saw the truth. You wanted excitement? Well, congratulations. Now you've got it. She lunged forward, grabbing the stack of papers and scattering them across the room. You think you're so righteous, don't you? She screamed. You think this makes you better than me? I didn't flinch. No, Samantha. It makes me smarter than you, and it makes me free. The confrontation didn't end there. Over the next hour, Samantha swung between rage, desperation, and something resembling remorse. She begged, screamed, insulted, and pleaded, but I held my ground. When she realized she wasn't getting through to me, her tone shifted. Ethan, she said, her voice softer now, almost trembling. We can fix this. I know we can. I'll end it with David. I'll do whatever it takes. Just give me one more chance. I stared at her, my expression blank. Why should I? Because I love you, she said, tears streaming down her face. I know I screwed up, but I do love you. And I can be better. I swear I can. I shook my head slowly. You don't love me, Samantha. You love what I can give you. Stability. Security. A safety net for when your little games blow up in your face. But I'm done being your backup plan. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the couch, sobbing. For a moment, I felt a pang of something close to pity, but it passed quickly. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. You'll be hearing from my lawyer in the morning. She looked up at me, her face pale and tear-streaked. Ethan, please. No, I said firmly. It's over, Samantha. Pack your things and get out. That night, as I sat in the quiet house, I felt the weight of the confrontation settle over me. It wasn't the relief I'd expected. There was no satisfaction in breaking her down. But there was clarity. Samantha had made her choices, and I'd made mine. She thought she could destroy me, but in the end, she was the one left with nothing. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The morning after our confrontation, Samantha wasn't in the house when I woke up. I wasn't surprised. She'd probably gone to her parents' home, hoping they'd take her side or offer her a safe haven. What she didn't know was that I'd already been there. Her parents, Harold and Linda, were decent people. They'd always treated me with kindness, and I knew they'd be blindsided by the truth. When I'd shown them the evidence of Samantha's betrayal, Linda had wept, and Harold had turned so red I thought he might explode. How could she do this? Linda had sobbed, clutching the photos I'd given them. She made her choices, I'd said simply, and now she has to live with the consequences. Harold had nodded, his jaw clenched. She's going to ruin herself if she keeps this up. But don't worry, Ethan. We're not going to let her drag you down with her. I'd left their home knowing I had their support. Samantha wouldn't find the sympathy she was looking for there. Step 2 of my plan unfolded later that day. My lawyer, Frank Harrison, had wasted no time filing the divorce papers and sending them to Samantha's work email. He'd included a detailed list of the evidence we'd collected, ensuring that her firm's HR department was copied on the correspondence. Frank had warned me that it might take weeks for the firm to act, but it turned out they were faster than expected. By mid-afternoon, I received a call from Jack Turner, my private investigator. "You're going to want to see this," Jack said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "What is it?" "Check your email," he replied. When I opened the file Jack had sent, I couldn't help but smirk. It was a video recording of Samantha storming out of her office, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. David Reynolds trailed behind her, looking equally flustered. According to Jack, the firm had called both of them into a meeting after receiving the email. Faced with undeniable evidence of their affair, the firm's leadership had wasted no time terminating them both. Apparently, the partners didn't take kindly to their employees dragging the company's reputation through the mud. Samantha had lost her job, her status, and likely any chance of finding work in her field for a long time. Good. That evening, Samantha finally returned home. She looked like hell, her hair disheveled, her makeup smudged, and her expression a mix of anger and desperation. "We need to talk," she said, her voice trembling. "About what?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "This divorce," she snapped. "You're not going to get away with this, Ethan. I'll fight you in court if I have to." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? And what exactly are you going to fight with? Your word against mine? Because I've got more than enough evidence to sink you, Samantha. Go ahead, drag this into court. I'd love to see you try." Her bravado crumbled, and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "You're trying to ruin me," she said, her voice muffled. "No," I said calmly. "You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "Please, Ethan, don't do this. We can work something out, something fair." I almost laughed. "Fair? You want to talk about fair now? After everything you've done?" She didn't respond, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "You've already lost your job, Samantha," I continued, my tone cold. "And I'm guessing David isn't exactly standing by your side right now." Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. The next step in my plan was simple: financial separation. Samantha had always been reckless with money, and over the years, I'd been the one to ensure our bills were paid and our savings remained intact. Now, I wasn't about to let her drag me down with her. With Frank's help, I froze our joint accounts, ensuring she couldn't touch a dime of our savings. I also transferred my direct deposits into a separate account in my name, leaving her with access only to the bare minimum she'd contributed. When Samantha discovered what I'd done, the fireworks were immediate. "You can't do this," she screamed, slamming the bedroom door open. "Actually, I can," I said, barely looking up from my laptop. "And I have." She stalked over to me, her face twisted with fury. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Freezing the accounts? Cutting me off?" "Clever has nothing to do with it," I said, my tone calm. "It's about protecting myself. You made it clear that you have no problem using me, Samantha. I'm just making sure you don't get the chance." She stood there, seething, but she didn't have a comeback. The final stage of my revenge was more personal. Samantha had always prided herself on her social connections, her network of friends, colleagues, and acquaintances that she used to bolster her image. I wasn't about to let her keep that illusion intact. Over the next week, I quietly reached out to several mutual friends, sharing just enough of the truth to plant seeds of doubt. I didn't embellish or exaggerate. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. By the time Samantha realized what was happening, the damage was done. Her carefully curated image was in tatters, and the whispers of her infidelity had spread far and wide. "You're turning everyone against me," she said one night, her voice trembling with anger and tears. "No," I said, standing over her. "I'm just showing them who you really are." By the end of the week, Samantha had packed her things and moved out. Her parents reluctantly took her in, but even they couldn't shield her from the fallout. David had apparently ghosted her after losing his job, and the other men in her orbit were nowhere to be found. As for me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The house was quiet, the tension gone. I'd won. But this wasn't the end. There was still more to do. With Samantha out of the house, I finally felt a sense of clarity. But I wasn't done. There were still loose ends to tie up, and I wasn't about to leave anything unfinished. He started with David Reynolds. David thought he'd gotten off easy. Sure, he'd lost his job, but he still had his family, his reputation, or so he thought. It didn't take long to find his wife, Claire. Jack Turner, my PI, had already dug up her contact information. When I called Claire, I kept my tone calm and measured. Mrs. Reynolds? Yes, she replied, her voice cautious. Who's this? My name is Ethan Carter. I'm Samantha's husband, or at least I used to be. I think you should know that your husband, David, has been having an affair with her. There was a pause on the other end, then a shaky, I don't believe you. I thought you might say that, I said. That's why I have proof. I emailed her the photos and messages Jack had gathered. Within minutes, her response came in, a single word, bastard. It wasn't long before I heard that David's world had come crashing down. Claire had kicked him out of their home, filed for divorce, and started spreading the word among their mutual friends and family. Samantha had told me once that David was her rock, the one person she could count on. Well, now her rock was nothing more than a crumbled mess. The next step was addressing Samantha's fragile social standing. Samantha had always been the queen bee among her circle of friends. She hosted the best parties, wore the trendiest clothes, and was always the first to offer unsolicited advice about relationships and careers. But her friends weren't blind to her behavior. They just needed a little push to see the full picture. I made a point of meeting with several of them, casually bringing up Samantha's actions and showing them some of the evidence. I didn't have to embellish. The truth was damning enough. She's been lying to all of you, I said to her closest friend, Megan, during a coffee meeting. She's been using people, me, David, everyone around her, to get what she wants. And now, she's finally being held accountable. Megan was stunned, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. Samantha had burned more bridges than I realized, and her friends were quick to turn their backs once the facade crumbled. Within days, Samantha was an outcast. But the crown jewel of my revenge came a week later. Samantha had always been proud of her perfect relationship with her parents. Harold and Linda were the type of people who valued loyalty, respect, and tradition above all else. Samantha's betrayal didn't just hurt me. It was a slap in the face to everything they believed in. I decided to pay them another visit. When I arrived at their house, Harold greeted me at the door, his expression grim. "Come in, Ethan," he said, stepping aside. Linda was sitting in the living room, her eyes red and puffy. When she saw me, she gave a weak smile. "How are you holding up?" "I'm doing better," I said, sitting down across from them. "But I want to check on you. I know this hasn't been easy." Harold nodded, his jaw tight. "We've been struggling to make sense of it all. Samantha, she's not the daughter we thought she was. I'm sorry," I said sincerely. "I never wanted to bring this pain into your lives. But I couldn't stay silent." "You did the right thing," Linda said, her voice shaky. "We needed to know." We talked for over an hour, discussing everything that had happened and what the future might hold. By the end of the conversation, it was clear that Harold and Linda weren't just disappointed in Samantha. They were furious. "She's staying here for now," Harold said, his voice low and firm. "But it's temporary. She needs to figure out how to clean up her mess." "And if she doesn't?" I asked. "Then she's on her own," he replied. That night, Samantha called me. It was the first time she'd reached out since she'd left the house. "What do you want?" I asked when I picked up. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice thick with desperation. "I'm listening." She hesitated, then let out a shaky breath. "I messed up, Ethan. I know I did, but I don't know how to fix this. Everything's falling apart." Her words should have brought me satisfaction, but all I felt was a cold emptiness. "You can't fix this, Samantha. There's no going back. Please," she begged. "I'll do anything. Just tell me what you want." I thought about it for a moment, then said, "I want you to take responsibility. Own up to what you've done. Stop blaming me, David, or anyone else for your choices. If you can do that, maybe you'll have a chance to rebuild your life. But as far as I'm concerned, we're done." There was a long silence, then a quiet, "I understand." The next day, I received an email from Frank, my lawyer. The divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly, and thanks to the evidence I provided, the terms were heavily in my favor. Samantha wouldn't be walking away with much. It was poetic, really. She'd spent years manipulating, lying, and betraying, thinking she'd come out on top. But now, she had nothing, no job, no reputation, no allies. As I sat in my quiet house that evening, a sense of peace washed over me. I hadn't just survived Samantha's betrayal. I'd risen above it. And while she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, I was finally free to start anew. Weeks passed after Samantha moved out, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The house, once tense and filled with unspoken resentment, felt lighter. It was mine again, a quiet, peaceful space where I could think and rebuild. But just as I was beginning to feel like the worst was behind me, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail. The envelope was plain and unassuming, with no return address. When I opened it, I found a single sheet of paper folded neatly inside. The handwriting was rushed, but unmistakably Samantha's. "Ethan, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need to tell you something. Please read this before you decide what to do next." I rolled my eyes, already bracing myself for another plea or half-hearted apology. But the next few lines stopped me cold. "David's not who you think he is. There are things about him you don't know, things that could come back to hurt you. Be careful." It didn't make sense. David was an arrogant idiot, sure, but dangerous? It seemed like another desperate attempt by Samantha to shift the blame or create drama. Still, something about the letter nagged at me. Despite everything, Samantha had never struck me as paranoid or delusional. For her to write something like this meant there had to be a kernel of truth. I decided to dig deeper. Reaching out to Jack Turner, my private investigator, I asked him to run a more detailed background check on David Reynolds. "Think there's something worth finding?" Jack asked, his tone skeptical. "I don't know," I admitted. "But humor me." A few days later, Jack called back. "You were right to ask," he said, his voice unusually grim. "David's got skeletons in his closet, and they're uglier than I expected." "What did you find?" "Fraud, mostly," Jack said. "He's been embezzling money from his company for years, funneling it into offshore accounts. But that's not all. Looks like he's been using those accounts to fund some less-than-legal ventures. Drugs, gambling, maybe worse." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd written David off as a sleazy opportunist, but this was something else entirely. "Is there a risk this could blow back on me?" I asked. "Not directly," Jack said. "But you're smart to be cautious. If he gets desperate, and let's face it, he probably is, he might try to drag you into his mess." I hung up the phone, a knot of tension settling in my chest. The tension proved justified when, a week later, I received another unwelcome visitor, David himself. He showed up at my doorstep unannounced, looking disheveled and panicked. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, blocking the doorway. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice urgent. "It's about Samantha." "Whatever you have to say, I don't want to hear it," I replied, starting to close the door. David pushed against it, his desperation overriding any sense of decorum. "Please, Ethan, just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Against my better judgment, I let him in. David paced the living room like a caged animal, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Samantha's been telling people things about me, lies. She's trying to ruin me." I folded my arms, leaning against the wall. "You mean like the way you ruined my marriage? Forgive me if I don't feel sorry for you." "This isn't about that," he snapped. "This is bigger than that." He went on to claim that Samantha had been spreading rumors about his illegal activities, painting herself as a victim of his manipulation. While I doubted Samantha was entirely innocent, I knew David well enough to see through his self-serving narrative. "I'm not getting involved in your mess," I said firmly. "You made your bed. Now lie in it." As I opened the door to usher him out, David turned to face me, his expression dark. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said. "If you think you can just walk away from this clean, you're wrong. I'll make sure you regret it." The threat hung in the air as he stormed out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that David wasn't bluffing. His desperation, his erratic behavior, it all pointed to someone on the verge of collapse, and desperate people did dangerous things. I decided to stay one step ahead. With Jack's help, I forwarded the evidence of David's embezzlement to the authorities anonymously. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protecting myself and ensuring he couldn't harm anyone else. Within a month, David was arrested. The charges were serious enough to guarantee a lengthy prison sentence. And just like that, he was out of the picture. The fallout from David's arrest rippled through Samantha's life as well. With her connection to him, now public knowledge, she found herself even more isolated. Her parents, already strained by her behavior, began to distance themselves further, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. As for me, the entire ordeal had solidified one thing. I was free. Free from Samantha. Free from the toxicity she'd brought into my life, and free to start over. The twist, of course, wasn't just about David. It was about how much stronger I'd become through the chaos. I wasn't the same man who had walked into that bedroom and found his wife with another man. That version of me had been blindsided, broken. But now I was rebuilt, sharper, and more resilient. And as I stood on the porch of my newly purchased cabin in the mountains, the crisp autumn air filling my lungs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. The past was behind me, and the future? That was mine to create. A year ago, I would have never imagined my life would take this turn. Sitting on the deck of my cabin, coffee in hand, I looked out at the golden leaves dancing in the autumn breeze and felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. The chaos Samantha brought into my life had been like a storm, tearing through everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and trust. It had left me raw, battered, and questioning my worth. But now, as the dust settled, I saw the truth for what it was. I hadn't just survived, I'd grown. The divorce was finalized months ago, and it had gone entirely in my favor. Samantha's lawyer had tried to negotiate for more, but with the evidence on my side, they didn't have much leverage. In the end, she walked away with little more than the clothes on her back. I hadn't heard from her since. The few mutual acquaintances we still had told me she was struggling, bouncing between temporary jobs and estranged from her family. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't. Samantha had made her choices, and she was living with the consequences. As for David, his trial had been swift and damning. The charges of embezzlement and money laundering stuck, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife, Claire, had taken the opportunity to move on, filing for divorce and relocating with their children. Justice, it seemed, had a way of catching up to people like them. But the real story wasn't about Samantha or David. It was about me. When everything first fell apart, I'd been consumed by anger and betrayal. I wanted to burn everything to the ground, to hurt Samantha the way she'd hurt me. And I did. But in the process, I realized something. Revenge wasn't the solution. It was a step, a necessary one, but it wasn't the end. The real victory was finding myself again. I'd spent the past months focusing on what mattered. I left my corporate job and started a small consulting firm, one that allowed me to set my own hours and choose my clients. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about control. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with, started new hobbies, and even joined a hiking group. I'd always loved the outdoors, and there was something healing about climbing a mountain and standing at the summit, looking out at the endless horizon. And then there was Rachel. She wasn't someone I'd been looking for, just a friendly face I'd met on one of those hikes. But over time, our friendship grew into something deeper. Rachel was everything Samantha wasn't: kind, honest, and grounded. She didn't care about appearances or social status. She cared about the small things: shared laughter, quiet evenings, and the simple joy of being present. I didn't know where things would go with her, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that life doesn't stop for betrayal. It doesn't stop for heartbreak or anger. It keeps moving, pushing forward, whether we're ready or not. The key is to move with it. I'm not the man I was a year ago. That man was naive, overly trusting, and too willing to compromise his own happiness for the sake of someone who didn't deserve it. Now I'm stronger, wiser. I know my worth, and I know what I want out of life. Samantha's betrayal didn't destroy me. It revealed the cracks in my foundation and gave me the chance to rebuild, stronger than before. As I finished my coffee and watched the sun dip below the horizon, I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The pain, the anger, the loss, it had all been worth it to get here. And for the first time in years, I was truly free.